Are we waiting? I feel like we're waiting on North Carolina right now. Would you say that's accurate?
Yes.
Or
I just actually posted something about that today for people to understand. The Board of Governors has pretty much taken over. Now someone was trying to say that it didn't quite happen, but they did. They, as reported locally, they took some of the abilities away from the Board of Trustees, like filing lawsuits independently, hint, hint. And one of their members became the interim chancellor at North Carolina after they basically pushed the previous one out. So it's kind of a takeover. Think of it as a company being taken over, and how all of a sudden old relationships, they don't quite matter as much because there's a lot's going to be changed. That's kind of how this feels.
Gotcha.
So if they're trying to make sure that North Carolina State gets a home somewhere as well,
mm-hmm.
And if they get that, say both of them maybe going to the same conference, you might actually see a lawsuit come from the Board of Governors themselves. And considering the whole idea is that the ACC gets home cooking in the state of North Carolina, the threat is that, well, that's not the case if the Board of Governors jumps in.
Right, exactly.
Much more powerful in state.
Yeah, that's so are we, because I thought maybe it was from Greg's show, maybe it was from somewhere else. I feel like I've heard the schools in the states of North Carolina and Virginia, right, would be Virginia Tech, in that, are they still tied together as much as we perceive them to be? Or is this, because when I look at this, I've heard North Carolina, last year, I think ESPN did a report on this, where North Carolina and Virginia, right, SEC wanted to get into that.
Yes.
And North Carolina seems to be somewhat of a favorite right now for the SEC, if they indeed are able to get out and kind of do their own thing as well. But yeah, because I look at like teams like an NC State, I look at a Virginia Tech, and kind of when I take a step back and I look at, okay, if the ACC does come crumbling down, what does this team look like to me? What do I think? Where could I see them? Okay, I could see a North Carolina in either conference, the SEC or the Big Ten. I look at Virginia. I feel like they're a better fit for the Big Ten, but if the SEC wants to get up there, I could see that as well. But the point I'm trying to make is Virginia Tech and North Carolina State, they just don't seem to me like, no, those aren't Big Ten ads. They just don't seem to me like the SEC would want to pay extra for those. They seem like Big 12. That's what they seem to me. Where do you guys? I mean, that's just how I see it.
Tackle that first one. I got some thoughts as well on that, but I'm kind of curious to see what Moen has to say on this.
First one, I think North Carolina State. I think they would take them as a reduced revenue.
Okay,
to get North Carolina. Okay. I think they want North Carolina that badly. I think the Virginia situation is different. I think they will allow Virginia and Virginia Tech to split. I think Virginia's just got the political power.
Okay.
The SEC wants to get into Virginia, increase their footprint. They will take Virginia. I tend to agree with Greg. I think the chalk is Virginia, North Carolina State, North Carolina, and Clemson will be the 4 additions to the SEC.
Okay, good. Because I did notice, this is what when Florida State filed their lawsuit, they went after ESPN pretty hard, right, in their lawsuit. Clemson was a lot more friendly, shall we say. So that kind of made me think in the back of my mind, okay, Clemson is trying to, they may or may not get into the SEC, but they're at least trying to keep that door open. And that seems to be more of an SEC football team and a program over there as well. So, because the big thing about the Big Ten, as we kind of talk about these Southeast schools, and I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on this, because I continue to go back and forth and back and forth. The day changes and my mind changes on this, is academics, research, AAU, right? The most 3 important letters when you talk about Big Ten expansion, it seems right now. Nebraska, right? There's been some stuff floating around about them and how their administration is maybe concerned with their lack of research and funding and AAU right now. But when I look down south, Florida State, okay, not a member right now. Academically, I thought they stacked up pretty good. But of course, AAU and research is, of course, very important to these Big Ten presidents as well. So I don't know. I would like to see FSU in there with maybe someone like a Miami that recently came. But how do you guys kind of school me on where do you think things stand on the Big Ten as it pertains to the Southeast?
You want to go first, Immaculate?
Yeah, I'll try to tie these two together. In my opinion, in the past, there was a lot of North Carolina focus for the Big Ten.
Yep.
And Virginia was like the little brother to come with. Like, you're not really looking at Virginia on its own because Maryland's kind of already got you there.
Yeah.
And two, they don't get great followings. Like, they're in football, they're not going to have great crowds, so you can't really count on them to have a good home game for you. So you're really just having, like, if they're going to have to be on twice, because that's in the deals that they make with the networks, it's going to have to be away games. So it's not a great ad. North Carolina, they're getting better. Also not great in that regard, but you get your value from them in other ways.
Yep.
Florida State is why this new look Big Ten to me makes a lot of sense. They are pushing towards AAU. So, if they get that in 5 to 10 years, fine, whatever. But I call them FSU. I think that stands for Fox Sports University. I think that's exactly what they want, who they want, and where they want to be. It's in Florida, but it's not just in Florida. It's like you could spit and hit the border of Georgia.
Right, yeah.
Same with Mississippi, straight down the 10 from Louisiana and New Orleans. So if you're going to go down south somewhere and you're going to be limited down there, that's pretty much the one you want.
So okay. So if it's FSU, and that seems to, when these lawsuits start, it seems like FSU to the Big Ten was the chalk, right? And it seems to be that's the betting favorite right now. And maybe if they get admitted when they're not AAU status, when they do get admitted, they might say, hey, you got 5 to 7 years to get this in order. So, and I think maybe
and that could be what's causing Nebraska. Like, if those type of things are being said to Florida State within, maybe they're catching residual from that, saying maybe we should, get our stuff together, because this is what they're telling Florida State.
Well, I'm curious if I think Greg talked about it when Notre Dame, Miami, USF, that recent AAU additions, that there could be some horse trading going on behind the scenes as well, to maybe get FSU to that AAU status. So that's something to maybe consider. So Miami is one that is interesting to me, because Miami, when you kind of, as a college football fan and a college sports fan, you think of them, right? They haven't been ultra successful the last 20 years. Right.
Brand
you had the 1 year, it was at 2016, the turnover chain year is what I call it, when Mark Richt was at Miami. So, but you kind of take that out. This is a program that does not draw a lot of fans, right? When they're not good. Okay. This is dare I say, maybe the USC of the Southeast, where if they're not really good, maybe they're not drawing a bunch. Maybe it's a little bit less at Miami than it is USC, but maybe they're in the same ballpark there.
Can I throw something at you about Miami real quick?
Yeah, let's do it.
Right into your thinking here.
Yeah.
I actually see Miami as more value to the Big Ten for away games than they do for home games. Like what I was just talking about, how you'd have to have Virginia do that because their home games aren't good. I look at Miami in the same way, but as a positive, because think of it. If your team is telling your local fans Miami is coming this year, that's a bonus, right?
That is a bonus. Yeah,
people just want to see them. They want to see it for whatever reason.
Like, even if they haven't been good in 20 years,
right?
People know what the U on the helmet meant in the 80s, in the 90s, in the 2000s. They know that's a symbol, right, of college football. Like Nebraska, right, has been that, where when Nebraska comes to Purdue, when Nebraska comes to Ohio State, etc. Right, that's going to draw a crowd. Now Nebraska's got a big fan base, right? That's also a big advantage for the Huskers, a big traveling fan base as well. So yeah, I'm just very intrigued, and that of course leads into our discussion about the Yellow Jackets, right? Where does Georgia Tech stand in all of this? Because they are that academic school in Atlanta, right? That's always been, and I know markets don't maybe mean as much now as they did when the cable boxes were added in Rutgers and Maryland. Right. Back in the early 2010s. Right now, it's maybe about stockpiling as many big brands as you can, which is why FSU and Fox wanting to get FSU into the Big Ten could make a lot of sense. But it seems to me that maybe 2 of them down there. Originally, I thought maybe 3, but it seems to be 2 in the Southeast. It seems to be 2 to possibly get to 20. So if FSU is your 19th, like, and if we're saying Clemson might be SEC bound, are we then deciding, is it Miami and Georgia Tech, or is that even a discussion? Is it Miami and there's not a conversation with the Yellow Jackets? Do you think there's a debate there?
I don't think there's a debate. I think you take Miami, you lock Florida down.
Yeah, right. That makes sense. Yeah.
Georgia Tech will be there. Georgia Tech will be there.
That's true.
In the future and get them. I think right now you get Florida State, Miami,
you
lock Florida
secure
down.
a rivalry. Yep.
If Miami is available, you go Miami.
Okay.